All right. So, I was going through the news as I normally do, and I came across a story that I thought was, well, troubling, I guess we can say. So, story is from a guy named Seymour Hersh. This guy's a well-respected investigative journalist. He's done a lot of good work for the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War, Abu Ghraib prison when the U.S. invaded Iraq, and he's done some other stuff. His more controversial recent work, which is, I guess, kind of not ruined his reputation, but it's got a controversy to his reputation. We'll say that. He said that the Obama administration didn't kill, or they lied around surrounding the events of Osama bin Laden's death, and he's also argued that the Syrian civil war. He's argued about the use of chemical weapons there and how the U.S. has been lying about that too. But what he's saying right now, this is from his substack, named Seymour Hersh, published yesterday, February 8th. How America took out the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, a lot of you guys might recall how last year, in the month of September, late September, I think, we suddenly heard about how a pipeline called Nord Stream running through the Baltic Sea suddenly blew up, is the main story. Sweden and Denmark both conducted investigations and concluded that the pipeline must have been sabotaged, that the rupture was not natural, and it was just dumping tons of methane gas into the Baltic Sea. This pipeline ran from Russia through the Baltic Sea and into Germany. Basically, cheap natural gas from Russia was going into Germany, helping the German economy, helping the Russian economy. Anyhow, this guy's saying the U.S. is responsible for blowing it up. Now, the speculation online for a while has been that maybe it was the U.S., but the official narrative coming out of the White House has always been that Russia's the one that did it. Why? Well, because they want to hurt Germany and cut off their access to natural gas. But here's the problem, though. If Russia wants to cut Germany off from natural gas, all they have to do is turn off the pipeline. You don't have to blow it up. I mean, Russia essentially gets the choice of, do you get millions of dollars of value in terms of the natural gas that you send to Germany, or probably more like billions of dollars, but you get the idea. Tons of money. Do you get money from Germany for your natural gas? Or do you hurt Germany during, I don't know, say the winter? No natural gas. Your people will freeze. People get upset at your own government. Basically leverage. It's either money or pain. Now, the White House has been saying that Russia blew it up, but it's Russia's pipeline. They control the flow. They dictate when Germany does and doesn't get natural gas. They can always just turn it off. Why destroy this multi-billion-dollar piece of infrastructure that only helps you or gives you leverage? If you destroy it, you destroy your own source of leverage. And that's where you start to think logically. If it's Russia's source of leverage, then wouldn't it help for the United States to be the one to blow it up? The answer is, yeah, it would. Anyhow, Seymour Hersh is basically coming out and saying the U.S. did this. Now, I want to go ahead and say that the source that he's talking to prove this remains anonymous. He doesn't give the guy's name, doesn't say who it is, so it's kind of hard to confirm. But if his source is trusted, then it's true. So take it with a grain of salt, but the implications of the story, whether true or not, are huge. So, let's go ahead and scroll down. All right. So, let's see. Where are we? Last June, Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Now, in case you don't know, Baltops 22... it is basically a big NATO Navy joint exercise using ships from multiple fleets. So you have Germany that's involved, the US that's involved, Scandinavian countries. Basically, NATO countries perform a Navy exercise in the Baltic Sea. This operation was being used as cover to go plant the explosives and needed to blow up this pipeline. That's the basic gist of what he's saying here. So, moving on. 2 of the pipelines, which were known collectively as Nord Stream 1, had been providing Germany and much of Western Europe with cheap Russian natural gas for more than a decade. A second pair of pipelines, called Nord Stream 2, had been built but were not yet operational. Now, with Russian troops amassing on the Ukrainian border and the bloodiest war in Europe since 1945 looming, President Joseph Biden saw the pipelines as a vehicle for Vladimir Putin to weaponize natural gas for his political and territorial ambitions. So, to summarize, the U.S. and Joe Biden think that Nord Stream is a threat to U.S. security in Europe. Sounds kind of dumb when you put it that way, right? U.S. security in Europe. Well, the U.S. is not in Europe, but basically it's U.S. control over Europe, as you could redefine it. They see it as a threat, therefore they don't really like it, and so they've come up with a plan to blow it up. Moving on. Biden's decision to sabotage the pipelines came after more than 9 months of highly secret back-and-forth debate inside Washington's national security community about how to best achieve that goal. For much of that time, the issue was not whether to do the mission, but how to get it done, and with no overt clue as to who was responsible. All right, now this report is kind of important because that explains why it is that there were no leaks, no evidence to how this might have happened. All right. There was a vital bureaucratic reason for relying on the graduates of the center's hardcore diving school in Panama City. The divers were Navy only and not members of America's Special Operations Command, whose covert operations must be reported to Congress and briefed in advance to the Senate and House leadership, the so-called Gang of Eight. The Biden administration was doing everything possible to avoid leaks as the planning took place in late 2021 and into the first months of 2022. So, if you'd gone back and read the intro to this article, which I didn't because just to save time, the U.S. Navy has a diving and salvage center in Panama City, which is in the panhandle of Florida, close to the Alabama border. 70 miles from the Alabama border. Right? And so, the importance is that because the Navy reports, the president doesn't have to give Congress a report of its activities. That's why they chose to go with Navy divers. For normal covert operations, I guess you would use, what you would call it, the U.S. Strategic, what's the name? America's Special Operations Command. That's what it's called. So these guys normally handle that similar stuff, but they have to report to Congress. And when you give a report to Congress, members of Congress could get access to those reports. Maybe not necessarily all members, but certain members who might be involved in things like the Intelligence Committee, they might be able to know. And Congress is pretty leaky because political ambitions could influence one member of Congress to release those reports, as well as ideological ones. You may just be a member of Congress who says, hey, doing this kind of thing is really dumb. We should not antagonize Russia. This is an act of war. In fact, even in this article, it says that the people involved knew that it's an act of war. So if you're opposed to this from the start, you could have leaked it before the operation could have been completed and therefore avert potentially World War III. But now, as it stands, it's been done. The pipeline's been blown up. This article's come out. Russia's been suspecting the U.S. for a while to be behind this, but with this blog post, it is a blog post, essentially. So it's not really an official source. You can't really trust the information that's being provided because it's an anonymous source. If it's an anonymous source, you can't really prove it. If you could give us the name of the guy involved, maybe we could get him to Congress to testify under oath and be like, did this happen or not? But that's not how it's working out, unfortunately. So, this is the basic gist of what's going on. Let's see if we can quickly search for, Control F, Act of War. Yeah. All right. Over the next several meetings, the participants debated options for an attack. The Navy proposed using a newly commissioned submarine to assault the pipeline directly. The Air Force discussed dropping bombs with delayed fuses that could be set off remotely. The CIA argued that whatever was done, it would have to be covert. Everyone involved understood the stakes. This is not kiddie stuff. If the attack were traceable to the United States, it's an act of war. So just think about that for a minute. What this guy is alleging, Seymour Hersh, is that the United States is in fact responsible for blowing up Russia's pipeline. This is an act of war. They have cause to fire nukes at us for this kind of stuff. That's concerning. All right, now let's move on. Pulitzer Prize winning... let me start over. Pulitzer winner Seymour Hersh claims U.S. Navy behind Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion. This article is written by Caitlin Dornbos and Samuel Chamberlain, writing for the New York Post. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh has alleged the U.S. Navy divers laid bombs that destroyed Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline under the Baltic Sea last September, drawing a denial from the Pentagon Wednesday. Of course they deny it. Why would you admit to committing an act of war against Russia when there's already an act of war in Ukraine? Russia keeps saying they're involved in World War III, or at least their commentators do. Hersh, 85, went on to claim the Navy conducted the operation under the cover of a NATO maritime exercise, Baltops 22. All right, we already know that. We covered that in the substack. Basically, this article from the New York Post kind of summarizes it. These are deliberate here we go. Swedish officials suspected the blasts were the result of gross sabotage, and some Western officials were quick to blame the attacks on Moscow as it blocked gas supplies to Europe in response to sanctions over last year's invasion of Ukraine. These are deliberate actions, not an accident. The situation is as serious as it gets. These statements come from Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm not a pro at pronouncing Scandinavian names. Now we got some statements from Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. This is in response to Hersh's article or blog, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, apparently Russia has repeatedly expressed its belief that U.S. and NATO were involved. So let's move on to Reuters. The Kremlin says those behind Nord Stream blast must be punished. By Guy Falconbridge and Vladimir Soldatkin. Well, this is always fun to read. Kremlin saying that basically that whoever blew up its pipeline is going to need to pay, essentially. And that would be the U.S. Oh, and Norway. They were also involved in this, but mostly the U.S. handled the operation. Norway helped a little bit. And of course, Norway's denying it. The White House is denying it. The Pentagon is denying it. As soon as you're caught doing something wrong, first thing you do, you deny it. But then again, there's still the speculation of, is this even true? Boy, do I hope it's not. Because I hope we can get a real investigation of this and we prove that it's not real, it's not true. This guy was lying to Seymour Hersh for whatever reason. Because if it is true, then Russia would have to respond. They'd have to escalate their war against NATO. Because right now they're just at war in Ukraine, but they're fighting essentially a Ukraine that's backed up by NATO. So it's you could call it a Russia-NATO conflict. But this kind of stuff, two NATO countries operating without the knowledge of other NATO countries, yeah, kind of paints the idea that maybe Russia should escalate its war. And if they do that, then what does China do? Because China's closely linked to Russia. Granted, they haven't been totally on board with the whole war in Ukraine, but China's also thinking about invading and taking Taiwan. So they're not exactly quick to condemn Russia's acquisition of parts of Ukraine. So yeah, let's move on. We got a sharp drop in pressure in the pipeline. All right. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Hersh's blog post deserved more attention and that he was surprised it had not been covered more fully by Western media. Obviously not. This is pretty bad. Yet White House calls it utterly false and complete fiction and nonsense. The world must find out the truth about who carried out this act of sabotage, Peskov told reporters. This is a very dangerous precedent. If someone did it once, they can do it again anywhere in the world. He called for an open international investigation of this unprecedented attack on international critical infrastructure. It is impossible to leave this without uncovering those responsible and punishing them. Peskov struck a note of caution about treating a blog as a primary source, but said it was unfair to ignore an article he said was remarkable for the depth of analysis. Yeah, he's right. There's a lot of good analysis in that blog post from Seymour Hersh. Russia, without evidence, has repeatedly said the West was behind the blasts affecting the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines last September, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects that carried Russian gas to Germany. President Vladimir Putin has accused Anglo-Saxon powers of blowing up the pipelines, a Kremlin-designed project to circumvent Ukraine and exporting its gas under the Baltic Sea directly to Western Europe. Oh, man. All this is worrying. I really don't want there to be World War III over this stuff, but boy, This is the kind of stuff that gets you World War III. It's not quite as bad as, say, I don't know, let's take World War One. Maybe it is quite as bad. Like, in World War One, there was a variety of factors that pulled the U.S. into war. You had the sinking of the Lusitania, which was a passenger ship, but weapons and military equipment were on board that ship as well, being sent to Britain to help Germany in its fight against the Entente powers. You had the Zimmermann telegraph, which was a telegraph between Germany and Mexico, where basically Germany is telling Mexico that, hey, we'll help you take back parts of the United States, like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, those kinds of states, if you help us out in our war effort. Yeah, and the bunch of stuff like that basically helped pull the U.S. closer and closer towards war. And then you also have the speculations about the U.S. financial interests at stake. The U.S. had loaned billions of dollars towards countries like France and Great Britain, trying to help them better their fight against Germany, essentially, because Germany was doing pretty well. But with that much money at stake, if those Germanys don't win the war, they're not going to be... If those countries do not win the war, they won't be able to pay back their debt. So there's the question of, were big money lenders like JP Morgan, Chase, were they pulling the U.S. towards war, lobbying for war against Germany to ensure that their investments didn't turn belly up? That's also a part of it, you know? Sorry about the dogs. Someone's at the door and they're just going crazy over it. No one's shutting them up. All right. Now let's go to Yahoo News. And this is basically the narrative that's being pushed out from the White House, I'd say. That's my opinion of it. From Mia Jankovits. Thursday, February 29th, 2023, published this morning. Once celebrated journalist Seymour Hersh made unproven claims the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. Hersh won a Pulitzer in 1970, but his more recent work has come under sharp criticism. But Russia pounced on this claim, swiftly endorsing it despite there being no current evidence of its truth. To be fair, it is speculation and an anonymous source. If the anonymous source is true, then it's fine. But if not, problems. But this is just pretty typical, I guess you could say, lingo in corporate press or establishment press or government establishment shills. Basically, unproven claims without evidence and, pouncing on claims. It's typical. These are loaded terms meant to make you think a certain way. They're framing this conversation instead of honestly trying to talk about it. So, what she says is, a journalist's heavily disputed claim on Wednesday that the U.S. government blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipelines sparked a flat rejection from the White House and glee from the Kremlin. Seymour Hersh alleged in a self-published article that the Biden administration partnered with Norway in a top-secret operation targeting the pipelines under the Baltic Sea, which were destroyed in June 2022. Destroyed in June 2022? Someone wasn't really reading the article. They were destroyed in September. The operation was conducted in June. Yeah, that's kind of typical for you. Let's see. Let's Google it real quick, just to make sure I got my facts right. Let's see. What words were used? Nord Stream pipeline explosion date. 26th of September, 2022. Going back to our Yahoo article from writer Mia Jankovits. Let's see. Yeah. Targeting the pipelines under the Baltic Sea, which were destroyed in June of 2022. False. You get your dates wrong. This person is just spitting out garbage that they read on Twitter. This person isn't paying attention. The Baltops operation, the joint NATO exercise of Navy ships from multiple NATO countries, were operating in the Baltic Sea in June 2022. What they were not doing, however, is that they were not blowing up the pipeline in June. It was blown up in September. Details matter. This person is not being honest. Or at least, this person is not very smart. Yahoo should really issue a correction for this. All right. Anyhow, we got some more stuff about how Hersh did good stuff for the My Lai massacre, the Abu Ghraib reporting, the doubts about the Osama bin Laden and Syria chemical attacks. All right, in Russia, Hersh's story has been greeted with a sense of vindication. Yeah, of course it was. But all you really get from this article is just gaslighting. They spend a lot of time attacking or framing it as Seymour is not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, but he indulges in theories or stories that aren't officially true. They're not part of the official narrative. And all the while, Russia is just super happy to be able to blame the US for this whole thing. When logically, when you think about it, why would Russia blow up their own pipeline when they could just turn it off and accomplish the same thing? This is what doesn't make sense to me. Oh, those remarks. Let's see. Russian politician Konstantin Kostashev wrote on Telegram that saying the reporting is impossible to dismiss. Those remarks were shared by TV personality Vladimir Solovyev, arguably Russia's leading propagandist, to his 1.3 million Telegram followers. Well, I don't know who these Russian people are, but a TV personality, maybe, what is he, a news anchor for Russian state media? Maybe that's where he gets his 1.3 million Telegram followers from. That would be my guess. But if you're not interested in being honest and more interested in pushing establishment narratives, then this is what you get from the media. From mainstream media, at least. You should at least try to be critical and think for yourself. This stuff is just... I don't know how it is that you could be so dishonest, because it's all essentially, it's attacking Seymour Hersh's character or his work, and then attacking the intentions of what Russia is saying, rather than looking at the fact that it's a good article, it was pretty in-depth, went over a lot of pretty good details, and if you're being honest with yourself, it sounds pretty damning. I mean... I doubt that Seymour Hersh is just some fiction writer trying to get clicks. This man's done pretty good and influential work. This stuff is historical. The Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, where I think it was members of the West Virginia Maryland National Guard unit were the ones in charge of guarding a prison, but they were mistreating the prisoners, and they're like stripping the guys of their clothing and forcing them to pose together in really, I guess you could say, sexually provocative almost ways. And the reason for that would be because of Islam's whole thing against homosexuality. I mean, all the Abrahamic religions have that, if you're being honest with yourself. Whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, none of them are in favor of homosexuality or the LGBTQ stuff. Man, it's frustrating that people can be so dishonest about this stuff. At least be completely unwilling to take it seriously and just push forward narratives. I mean, some people, I guess you could say, on the more conspiratorial side are instantly championing this. But the work that's put out makes a lot of sense. Oh, and here's a nice little clip from C-SPAN that was included. President Joe Biden promising that Nord Stream 2 wouldn't be a thing. So let's listen to it for a few minutes. Pretty sure he says it around here. I can't hear it. Microphone set up and all, so we'll just pause that. We won't keep watching. But yeah, that's about all that I really have for today. I don't want to drag this on longer than it has to. I feel like I kind of had. But I think this is important. We're staring down what could be a World War III in Eastern Europe. I don't really want the US and Russia to go to war. I don't want China to have to get involved in this. What I ultimately prefer is for everyone to calm down, for a peace agreement to be struck, but it doesn't seem like anyone's interested in having that happen. There's even some reports going around that I've seen the U.S. try to kill a potential peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. I haven't looked into that yet, but I intend to. Boy, it's unfortunate that the world is like this, but this is the way it is. All right. Well, thanks for listening if you did. If you like what I have to say, please consider liking and subscribing. It means a lot. I don't really have that big of a presence. Not that I'm necessarily going for a huge presence, but what I really want is for ideas like this to perpetrate. I want them to be out there. I want people to talk about it. I want people to be aware of what's going on in the news, because this kind of stuff affects us. I mean, what happens if tomorrow Russia decides it's going to officially declare war on the U.S. or fire nukes at us? What happens when the U.S. decides to start drafting young men such as myself into combat? I don't really want to go to war. It's not even a war I believe in. It's a war over energy security, basically, when you look at it, because these pipelines were giving Russia tons of money, funding its effort to help acquire parts of Ukraine. Well, not necessarily. By the time the pipelines blew up, yeah, there was a war, but when the planning for the blowing of the pipeline started, there wasn't a war. But basically, Russia's trying to increase its geopolitical influence, and they're moving into Europe to do that by selling natural gas. The U.S. is threatened by it. They're considering war, or they performed an act of war, really. I don't know, man. Hope and pray that things get better, but unfortunately, so often they don't look like they are. Anyhow, have a good one. Thanks and bye.